think what arts and humanities approaches do is, it's not just that they uncover stories, they actually tell stories. So part of what we're doing is trying to narrate, which is different from describe, and I'll clarify that in a moment. I think we're trying to narrate the process of student learning. So narrate is different from describe, I think, in that when you move from, so description is often static. Narration is about change over time. And narration involves, I think, a little bit more active interpretation. Description often includes interpretation, but narration puts that, it's context again, puts it into a context. We are trying to say what happens, and maybe even why it happens. And I don't think we can do that by looking at a moment. I think we have to look at change over time. So I think one of the things that Arts and Humanities SOTL does is pay attention to that transition, the shift over time in students' learning. Sometimes that's about about capturing a moment of student learning and looking closely to uncover the narrative of what's happening. So that is a process of reading between the lines. It's a process of interpretation. You'll notice that none of what I'm saying is about measurement. It really is about, I'll use Clifford Geertz's term, about thick description and really trying to capture what's going on. So maybe it's thick narration that we're doing, sort of trying to tell the story. And it's not only the method, therefore, that does that and that reveals that. It's the fact that what we're trying to do is tell the story, which reflects a different idea about what the study of learning is all about. That it isn't about, let me show you that this is happening. It's about, let me find out what's happening. And once I know what's happening, then I can, at least in theory, begin to figure out ways to facilitate that process. That reflects a different idea about what learning is than I think we see in research that is more a matter of measuring what changes in students' learning if I do X.
Arts and humanities disciplines, and I shouldn't speak for all arts and humanities disciplines, but certainly English doesn't go into it calling something a methodology. So, for instance, when I first started doing SOTL, I had a lot of difficulty understanding what was meant by methodologies. In our articles, we simply don't have that explicitly laid out. We do talk about interpretation, but I would say the closest to methodology would probably be theoretical frame or contextual frame. And so when I think about a methodology, I'm really thinking about what you do with your data. So for an English person, of course, I mean, what we do is we read the data and we try and make patterns of meaning, but we're always placing those patterns of meaning within a theoretical context. So sometimes you will talk about the theories involved in your work, but you typically don't talk about what you physically did with those texts.
They help us recognize that what's going on in the classroom is not disconnected from what's going on outside of the classroom, but rather is an extension of, reflects, and furthers some of the things that are going on outside of the classroom. So if we live in a society where sexism and racism are problems, we're likely to see some of those challenges within the classroom from faculty, where bias can come into play, from students where stereotype threat can come into play, and where from student to student and faculty to student relations can be determined ahead of time by those other factors. So one of the ways we get I think I often get a really deep picture is to recognize that we're situated, and the way we're situated in the classroom and that classroom is situated much more broadly, historically, politically, and socially within the context. I would also say that I think we're really interested in how students experience the learning process. One of the things I'm really interested in my own work is in understanding when we give student a task, not what they do, but how they understand what we mean by the task and what we're asking them to do, which determines in some ways what choices they make about how to do it. So if they think, when I give them something to read, if they think this is a memorizing task, they're going to read it very differently than if they think this is a task of exploring or imagining or argumentation. And so part of what I'm trying to really come to understand is the relationship between their understanding of the task, what choices they make by doing the task, and how, as a philosopher, I might see that same task and what choices I'm making in that task. So I think we both are focused on the relationship between the individual and how that individual is shaped by larger societal forces, but also how, even as they're shaped by those larger societal forces, how they interpret those and how those make meaning in the choices that they make, and how they interpret the work of the classroom.
I think we can do the kinds of thought experiments that philosophers do, but we can do them in design spaces, or we can do them in writing spaces about what would our lives as faculty and our students' lives look like if this was absent. So, and I think that's the way we add to a fuller picture. So, more specifically, I think music adds to that fuller picture by considering my project right now that I'm working on considers collaboration in the sense of a fuller project, and what collaboration brings and what collaboration does for the human being as a part of the larger educational project.
Arts and humanities methodologies help us tell a fuller social story, because our methodologies, which we don't call methodologies, tend to focus on and embrace ambiguity and the messiness of student experience. Just like we're interested in ambiguity and the messiness of different types of texts. So, for example, some social studies believe that if something shows up in an interview, for example, that's what's really happening. And I think sometimes arts and humanities folk tend to sort of look at what comes out of an interview with a little bit perhaps more of a skeptical lens, and trying to tease out some of the other meanings that might be existing at the same time for that interview participant.
While we may emphasize embodied knowledge, I think it occurs in other disciplines. It's just not acknowledged. And so I think the kind of studies that we can do in, well, dance would be a similar situation, in theater, acting at any rate. I mean, I always have to caution, theater is a multidisciplined discipline. So my particular area is actor development. But there's also set design, which is a visual discipline. There's cognitive of, analysis and playwriting and all of that kind of thing. So it's multiple disciplines. But in actor disciplines, which are the embodied knowledge that is there, I think studies of that can begin to illuminate the kind of embodied knowledge that, the neurocognitive scientists are beginning to discover is really in all of us, that happens with all knowledge, that interaction between mind and body, not the separation. I believe that we are primo place for observing that, and that might be applied to other disciplines.